Welcome to your in-depth astrology overview and zodiac forecast for November 2024. I'm going to share some standout details to look out for to begin with, then the event chart right at the start of the month. That provides some important information on the background energy that will play out through the month. But then, as events unfold, I'll share all of those before going through each of the 12 signs, from Aries through to Pisces, to give you a flavour of what you can expect in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you for joining me. If you're new here, please help the channel to thrive and click that sub button and also bell notification symbol. If you'd like to have a one-to-one with me, please check out my testimonials below. If you're yet to order your year 2025 personal horoscope forecast, if you order that now, you can get the rest of this year free, but also in my special package of 30% off, also your life roadmap report. The combination of all this information is fantastic value and will give you some unique insights to guide your moves future forwards. Please see the link below for more. Please also check out your year 2025 astrology overview and deep dive for each of the zodiac signs. Please see below for those too. This month begins with a new moon in the deep and passionate Scorpio, so it's quite a potent start to the month, but also ironically the two rulers of that sign come into an exact opposition on the 3rd. That's Mars and Pluto. In fact, they're going to be broadly opposite through the first 2 weeks of this month. Indeed, Mercury in its last degree in Scorpio is also opposite Uranus on the first day of November. So what a potentially explosive start to the new month. Now, Mars moved into the sign of Cancer early in September on the 6th, but it does move into Leo on the 4th. It is going to be going into a retrograde on the 6th of December, however, but on the 7th of this month, Mercury starts its pre-retrograde shadow as it goes retrograde on the 26th. So things are going to slow down. It moves into Sagittarius on the 2nd. Sagittarius is where Mercury is detrimented. So communications, particularly around transactions online, anything to do with contracts or overseas involvements, will need care. However, on the 11th, Venus climbs high in the sky. Charm will get us everywhere when it comes to our professional aspirations. And the ruler of Capricorn, which Venus moves into, Saturn, also ends its long retrograde on the 15th. So right at the heart of this month, in the sign of Pisces, it's going direct. But also, on the same day, we have a potent full moon, and that's a full moon in the sign of Taurus, but it's side by side Uranus, the planet of surprises. We can expect some unsettled conditions, I feel, around the financial markets. The 19th, however, sees Pluto return for its 3rd visit to the sign of Aquarius. This time it's for the long haul. It's not going to be going back into Capricorn in our lifetimes, and it's going to be here through to initially 2043 before leaving into 44. On the 21st, however, the Sun plays catch up with Mercury, joining into the sign of Sagittarius, but it forges an amazingly positive angle to Pluto, so I can't wait to share that with you. But on the 26th, as I mentioned before, Mercury formally goes into its retrograde for 19 days through to the middle of December. If you are planning to go anywhere in the run-up to Christmas, particularly to do with long distance travel, that will need to be very carefully managed right through to the 3rd of January next year, when Mercury emerges from its post-retrograde shadow. That gives you a flavour of what we can expect in terms of the standout moments. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the month. As ever, we need to look at the position of the two luminaries, but because of the new moon on the first day of the month, you can see the moon is very close to applying exactly to the sun, which will happen later on the 1st. That's really asking us to feel off the intensity, in a way, of the opposition between Mars and Pluto. So you can see right at the start of the month, Mars is at 28 degrees 52 minutes Cancer, Pluto at 29:44. So it's nearly perfect. They will come into an exact opposition on the 3rd of the month. Now that's a mighty standoff, particularly if we consider that Mars is not at its best in Cancer, can be rather reactive, defensive, perhaps even prickly, but particularly around anything to do with the home, because the sign of Scorpio can be to do with shared resources, but also anything to do with mortgages. If we're looking to transact something around a property, we are going to need to be pretty patient, because the opposition between Mars and Pluto suggests that this month could be very intense, because they are going to be in touch within 3 degrees through to the middle of the month. So whatever it is that you want to transform in your situation, which is very much that Scorpio energy, we can't expect it to happen instantly. And yet the opposition between Mars and Pluto does give us great willpower, great determination, but it can also see people use power in the wrong kind of way. Is someone going to guilt us out at work because we're needing to balance our home and family situation, and they want us to totally focus on the professional sphere? Because you can see that the moon, particularly at the start of this month, is in a T-square with both Pluto and Mars, so thus up in the ante. And we also need to be mindful of the position of Mercury, coming to the end of its journey through Scorpio, but you can see in the opposition with Uranus. So there can be a temptation to be rather spontaneous, impulsive even, with our resources, but I think the overall map is telling us that we need to try to resist that. And if anyone is trying to leverage us into doing something that benefits them, again, important to be mindful of what their motive is. We do have a lovely opposition between Venus and Jupiter at the start of the month, to be fair, which could make some of us very generous, particularly to those people who are less fortunate. But if you're in a situation where your long-term financial picture is not quite as clear as you would like, there is some uncertainty, a safety-first approach is probably best. And one of the great things about a Scorpio new moon, it gives us a lot of encouragement to get beneath the surface, to understand the deeper strands and influences that are at play. So whilst we can be impulsive because of that Mercury-Uranus opposition, and whilst we can be very generous with the Venus-Jupiter opposition, we can slow things down. That's going to be better, because then we can appraise things before making any binding decisions. It's a new moon that we're going to have later on the first day of the month, which also links in a quincunx with the North Node. Now this is particularly significant because that's the point of destiny, which is encouraging us all to tune into what we need as individuals, whereas the 8th house home of Scorpio is where we need to connect to others, and in some ways where we can be codependent. Are there certain parts of our situation that are not quite working for us as individuals? This new moon could flag it up. But equally, if we want to set a new amount of parameters in our situation and manage our long-term resources with more care, we may have to curtail some of our personal and individual needs. So as I mentioned in the introduction, on the 2nd, Mercury moves into the sign of Sagittarius, where it is detrimented. Now that transit is, of course, going to also be influenced by the retrograde, which begins on the 26th. And as I mentioned before, Mercury starts to slow down from the 7th. So if you are thinking of transacting anything to do with a business deal, anything to do with long-term finances, that drawdown could be delayed or affected by a lack of clarity. So if you're dealing with anyone, scrutinize the information with an enormous amount of care. I also mentioned about the intensity of Mars and Pluto being in opposition. That's exact on the 3rd, but it does go on through to the middle of this month. If there is someone that we do need to collaborate with, perhaps it's an ex-partner over childcare, perhaps it's over a business matter or a legal affair, the intensity that we can feel, particularly if someone's being very intransigent and unbending. If someone is applying a might is right approach, then obviously that can create a lot of issues. Now, of course, the 4th sees Mars move into Leo. Now, Mars in Leo is one of its favourite locations to showcase any kind of talent. If you are someone who enjoys amateur dramatics, plays in a band, you're a performer, a comedian, you're someone who's a maker or a creator, you get a great chance to shine in a particularly potent way for the following month through to the 6th of December when Mars goes retrograde. But equally, the opposition to Pluto is still in effect. It's changed slightly. It's slightly more subtle. And if you are someone that does want to be much more bohemian, much more expressive, it may be that you need to deal with someone who's much more conservative in their approach, and that in itself can prove to be rather frustrating. Now, of course, the 5th, we have a rather important event. Yes, it's that presidential election in America. I don't feel there's any doubt about it that Mars moving back to Leo probably could be quite good for Donald Trump, because he has Mars in Leo in his natal chart. And having Mars in Cancer in his 12th house, as his ascendant is also Leo, has probably been quite an uncomfortable thing for him. How will it play out? Well, I feel it is very close, of course, and it's not really about the popular vote, as we all know. It's about those electoral colleges. But there's probably going to be some fierce advocacy on either side of the debate, with Mars and Pluto buffering up against each other. Also on the 11th, with Venus, the planet of money, but also relating, moving into the conservative sign of Capricorn. That is an interesting development. Venus here can help us to think about things like, in a relationship sense, perhaps getting closer, making a relationship more formal if we met someone relatively recently. Also, the ruler of the sign of Capricorn, Saturn, goes direct in the middle of the month. I feel the journey of Saturn through Pisces since March 2023 has been encouraging all of us to work at understanding our emotional, psychological and spiritual well-being a lot more. But it does coexist at the heart of this month with that potent full moon in Taurus. Because Uranus is not at its best in Taurus, it's been there full time since March 2019, this suggests some volatility, as I mentioned before. In our own personal situation, we could find ourselves a bit like we did at the start of the month with Mercury in an opposition to Uranus, finding it difficult not to do something quickly, but perhaps also we could be tempted to do something erratically that might not be the best for us. Now, it just so happens that the moon in Taurus is exalted, it rises here. So in a way, it can be a little bit more of a beguiling full moon. But I think essentially we need to look back at the new moon in Taurus, which occurred earlier in the year. So when we set our intentions around working with that and improving the foundations of our world, valuing ourselves more, working on being a bit thriftier and making our ins and outgoings balance a little better, we're going to find out just how far we've come in that journey. But of course, Uranus applying to the moon can see us want to separate from something that isn't working. And if all that celestial politics and intensity in the first 2 weeks of this month has really had a big impact on a relationship, we could see it come to a close over the following 2 weeks. Also, Pluto returning to Aquarius on the 19th. Of course, it left on the 2nd of September, but it was there from the 21st of January, which is ironic because that's Pluto's formal birthday. Now we get a chance to appreciate the value of Pluto in the sign of the water bearer once more, but we've had 2 times to practice it. First of all, we had 11 weeks in 2023. I don't know if you noticed it, but at that time there was a huge amount of dialogue about artificial intelligence. Now things have slowed down, it seems to me, in terms of the news cycle, but it's definitely there and it's definitely with us for the long term. And I don't feel that Pluto moving into Aquarius is going to be a panacea, because Aquarius can be a rather detached, cool, logical sign. It can be about individuality as well as being about us as a collective. So we're going to find out how power, which is what Pluto can be about, but also transformations play out for the long term. It seems very likely that there are going to be some huge radical changes. These could be primed up from the 21st when the Sun moves into the sign of the Archer. Sagittarius energy can be very daring, adventurous, and of course it can be very free-spirited and independent. But we do have, in week 3, the Sun's opposition to Uranus just before he moves into the sign of Sagittarius. So once again, if there's a situation that's very intense, particularly around shared resources or even intimacy, if it's not working, the move of the Sun into Sagittarius and its link to Pluto in a sextile can give us the desire to create more space. So this is a month when I feel that incredibly powerful energies are going to play out. There could be storms because people see things in such polarized ways these days. There will be the people who are progressive, that's the Plutonian energy, and the people who want to maintain the status quo, the Mars in Cancer energy initially. But then when Mercury goes retrograde formally on the 26th, we're going to start to see the briefing, the denials, the twisting of the news cycle to suit particular agendas. I think that is almost inevitable, to be perfectly honest. And in some ways, perhaps Mercury's detriment in the sign of Sagittarius is pushing us to not take things at face value, to do our own research, to probe things, to go beyond the news headlines that we're fed. But certainly in terms of our personal situations, if you are thinking of moving anywhere, going on a long haul journey, there is something that you're trying to push forwards with contractually, the potential for delays is very strong towards the end of this month. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 signs from Aries through to Pisces, but please do check out your year 2025 forecast by clicking on the link beneath this video. Welcome Aries to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 Zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. What a start to the month, Aries. The first day sees the new moon in the sign of Scorpio, which for you is house 8. But let's just think about where the Sun had been and the power of the solar eclipse in the sign of Libra, because that was very much about relating, about understanding what you needed from other people, and also where you can collaborate with others. The new moon in Scorpio is going to give you an opportunity to see who is as committed and as invested as you really need. Now this can be romantically, It can be practically, it can be around finances, it can even be around your friendships, because Scorpio wants a sense of devotion in a way. It doesn't want half measures. So if someone's been telling you what you want to hear, the chances are you're going to find out if it can actually come to pass. But if you are wanting to grapple with your resources, do something different and fresh and imaginative, the opposition between Mercury in Scorpio right at the start of the month, threaded through this new moon, and Uranus in your sector of everyday resources, gives you the platform to do it. Just be aware, however, that with your ruler Mars in a very emotional part of your situation, in an incredibly powerful opposition with Pluto, which peaks on the 3rd of this month, the energy that's washing around the heavens is going to have a profound effect on us all. So I don't necessarily think it's the best of times to be making very quick decisions. You need to appraise the information. And the moon on the 2nd of Mercury into the sign of Sagittarius gives you an opportunity to do that. Now, if you're really into astrology, you'll know Mercury is detrimented in Sagittarius, but it's been in Sagittarius at the end of 2022, the start of 23 and the end of 23, and again at the start of this year. So we've had quite a lot of practice of Mercury in Sagittarius, and you can turn it to your advantage, because Mercury can be about how we think. The sign of Sagittarius can be about where we research. The key is to make sure you do that research in a very careful and very detailed way, particularly as in week 2 of this month, Mercury does square up to Saturn, and therefore your subconscious could in some ways play a little bit of a role in terms of perhaps what you're understanding. So in other words, you could read something and want it to say something, and you need to push back against that, particularly from the 4th, when Mars moves into a much more outgoing and dynamic part of your chart. Gives you a great chance socially, perhaps even romantically, through to the 6th of December to really strut your stuff. Have maximum of faith in your sense of attractiveness during that period of time. That's for sure, but Mars does continue to broadly oppose Pluto through to the middle of this month. So there can be some stubborn positions that people take. And for you, it could be that someone has a particular and rather more orthodox view of how they feel you should proceed. Maybe it's someone in your family, maybe it's a line manager, maybe it's someone you're seeking funding from for a small business. And if you're wanting to do something different, that can prove to be very frustrating. But with Mercury going into its pre-retrograde shadow on the 7th and Venus moving into Capricorn on the 11th, it's probably a time when you are going to need to be mindful of who can influence your future, even if it's not necessarily a person who's your proverbial cup of tea. However, the great news is that Saturn does go direct on the 15th. And that's going to release some psychological pressure that's gone on for 5 months. And that's something I feel that you're going to welcome. However, if you are thinking about doing something with your resources in a different way, the full moon at the heart of the month, also on the 15th, could give you some choices. And again, it's not the best of times to make rapid decisions. And yet, ironically, Uranus can sometimes push us to do that because it is such a very fast-moving energy. So if you are someone who does tend to be a little bit impulsive, try to step back from that. You're going to get some help, I feel, by the Sun moving into Sagittarius on the 21st and Pluto into Aquarius on the 19th. But right at the heart of this month, we do have the Sun in an opposition with Uranus. So that's a repetition of Mercury's opposition with Uranus right at the start of the month. So that desire to do something that is different and fresh, particularly if you're wanting to ignite a new approach around earning money just needs to be tempered by fact checking, and those facts needs to be scrutinized very carefully. And if you are, for example, getting some professional advice, it might not be a bad thing to get more than one person to give you some feedback. It is great, I feel, for your sign, however, that Pluto moves into Aquarius for the long haul on the 19th, because its journey through Capricorn has probably seen your professional situation be very tough at times since 2008. You may have gone through quite a few different manifestations of how you've connected to the world at large, but you will have developed an enormous amount of wisdom, experience and knowledge from all of that, which you can now apply by setting your long-term targets, the 11th house where Pluto moves to, in a much more informed way. The 21st is also terrific, with the Sun moving into your fellow fire sign of Sagittarius, for doing something that is fresh and different, but making it work in your advantage. If you are someone who's particularly adventurous or loves foreign travel, a great chance to do that, particularly with someone that you get on well with. So you could fly off with a good friend to get some winter sun, or if it's more your thing, perhaps some winter snow for some skiing. The 26th, however, does see Mercury go fully into retrograde for 19 days through to the middle of December, and it won't emerge from the post-retrograde shadow until early January. So if you are wanting to gain some extra information or knowledge about something that's really important in your life, it might go a bit slower than you would like, and it's possible that you will reset your position several times before you're absolutely satisfied about how things stand. So this month can be a month of fantastic intensity, Aries. If you're caught up in a very hot sexual relationship, it may prove very, very difficult to resist the other party, but later in the month, essentially, you get a chance to feel that you can be freely yourself and it will settle down, or you may want to spin out and become independent again. Equally, in a long-standing relationship that's ordinarily been quite good, there could be some intense discussions over finances, cutting down on certain things, making economies, trying to squeeze a bit more out of your budget. If you're both committed to that, it's not a problem. The 8th house can also be a very mystical transition with that new moon in Scorpio. If you are someone who's interested in the occult, watching those murder detective series on the TV, always fascinating. That's a very Scorpionic energy, that forensic ability to understand all the information, so the culprit is revealed, that kind of stuff. But we can do that in our own lives too. But just expect to feel a little bit on edge at times this month, and I do think it's a good month to try to step up your exercise routine in some kind of way to burn off some of the frustration that I think is possibly likely to ensue. Have a great November, and please do check out your year 2025 forecast by clicking below. Welcome Taurus, to your in-depth monthly horoscope for November 2024 for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart right at the start of the month. We need to be mindful of the luminaries, but also, of course, your ruler. Your ruler, Venus, is in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a very free-spirited, independent sign, but for you it's house 8. That can be where we're most devoted. It can also give you a desire to be close and passionate, particularly if there's someone in your world that's really calling out to you. Now, of course, the chart shows the combination of the moon and also the sun. That's going to close up later on the 1st of November and become the new moon. That gives you a gorgeous opportunity over the next month to focus on your interactions with others. The 7th house can be about marriage, it can be about partnership, but most of all, I feel, in a modern context, it's about understanding our needs in terms of relating, but also being aware of what other people need from us. The moon in Scorpio is technically in its fall, not its greatest location. The energy of Scorpio is passionate. So in a way, this is a new moon, which is asking you to really sense into the most profound of those connections. So Venus being in house 8 is just emphasizing that. Also, Mercury, the ruler of the sign of Gemini and Virgo, is joining up with Venus on the 2nd of the month. But the critical thing is, before then, Mercury is in an opposition with Uranus in your sign. Now that's a very interesting combination, and it could create a lot of tension, to be honest, because it's possible that if you feel that someone isn't tuning into you, isn't listening to you quite as well as they might do, could make you a little bit more outspoken and rebellious. And speaking of rebellion, with Mars and Pluto in an opposition broadly through the first 2 weeks of this month, but exactly on the 3rd across your communicational axis, the 3rd and the 9th houses, if there is someone that you encounter, perhaps who has ideas that you find truly inspirational, that can be a great way to become welded to what they have to offer. But unfortunately, the converse can be true. Mars and Pluto in an opposition can create tremendous strident energies, a lot of desire and willpower. But equally, just be mindful that in any kind of connection to others, people may see you as being very assertive, Mars in the 3rd house, but because initially it's housed in Cancer through to the 4th, there can be a potential to be a bit prickly and a bit defensive if other people have different world views. So if you're traveling, don't rush. If you're discussing something, and of course we've got a big event coming on the 5th, so there is going to be a lot of discussion. If people see things differently to you, there could be a tendency to be quite transient in your viewpoint, but then that could affect relationships. So try to stay aware of the need to ensure collaboration and the flow of dialogue to and fro is kept open right at the start of this month. But on the 4th, Mars does make a transition into Leo. Now, Mars loves being in Leo. It's a very grand location for Mars to be, and through to the 6th of December, it's going to be in forward motion. If there are things you want to achieve around a property matter, perhaps there's do-it-yourself tasks that have been put off, perhaps you're needing to get some contractors in to help you, your determination to make that happen is certainly going to step up. But on the 7th, Mercury goes into its pre-retrograde shadow. And that means that things are going to slow down. And because it moved into the sign of Sagittarius on the 2nd, joining up with Venus, that 8th house energy, anything about financial affairs could slow down. You might not quite get the information or the outcome as rapidly as you would like. The 11th, however, does see your ruler move into your sister Earth sign of Capricorn, the 9th house. But that's a position where Venus demands truths. And of course, the sign of Capricorn is really quite steadfast. It can be quite exacting because it's ruled by Saturn. So if there is someone that you have struggled despite that new moon and despite the intensity of all the energy washing around, you have struggled to know exactly where you stand with them, you're going to be determined to find that out from the 11th onwards. But on the 15th, Saturn ends its long retrograde. If your friendship sector has felt rather frozen for the last 5 months, things can start to shake up and loosen up. But on the 15th, there is a full moon in your sign. And if you have really tried to make something work around any kind of collaboration or partnership or even romantic situation early in the month, and you don't feel that you're getting the satisfactory feedback that you really want, I think it's possible on this full moon, because it's very close to Uranus, that a more rebellious side of your nature can come to the fore. In fact, in week 3 of this month, we are going to see the Sun in an opposition with Uranus, and that full moon suggests that if something isn't quite working, that part of you that can be quite single-minded will assert itself, and you could put a distance between you and someone that you don't feel is tuning into you. But on the 19th, Pluto moves back into Aquarius for its 3rd visit, very much about your connection to the wider world. If you started to really push forwards with great determination in March 2023, you may have had a purple patch around your career for about 11 weeks. There may have been more of that since the 21st of January this year through to the 2nd of September. But if things have stalled a little bit because you've been learning more, gaining more information, perhaps appraising yourself of a subject in greater detail, now you have an opportunity to face outwards to people again and demonstrate how talented you can be. The Sun plays catch up with Mercury on the 21st, making its way into your 8th house. So all the conversations that have gone on, despite the intensity of Mars opposite Pluto, despite the Sun opposite Uranus, and despite the full moon being shrouded in your sign by Uranus, the 21st, as the Sun makes its way into Sagittarius, is going to be a key moment. You're either going to invest more, dedicate your more to a situation or a person, or you're going to want to break free. But if you are a business person, the link to the Sun and Pluto can be really significant. There could be some kind of transition that really gives you greater power or releases you in some ways, but a way that works financially for you. So you could have a change of career at that point. The 26th, however, does see Mercury formally go into its retrograde for 19 days through to the middle of December, but it won't be until the 3rd of January that it emerges from that. So if you are trying to work out something to do with your long-term income, a pension matter, you're trying to transact on or complete on a property purchase, things could go frustratingly slow because of that Mercury retrograde. I should just say also that Mercury does in Sagittarius square up with Saturn in week 2. If there are people that you're trying to collaborate with, perhaps in business, that have different objectives or values, that could show up in week 2 as well. So this month, in summary, Taurus, is an opportunity really to bring some kind of warmth and movement and uplift to your relationship sector, but it's not going to be without some conditions, and those conditions are going to be your conditions and they need to be met. So I feel anyone that you're going to really get closer to is likely to have a worldview that aligns with yours. If you're involved in any kind of relationship where you see things very differently, that can cause some tensions. If you are traveling anywhere through the first 2 weeks of this month, don't rush the journey. You could get a home-based project that's stalled moving again from the 4th. The truth of any kind of relationship could become clearer at the heart of this month, but the full moon in your sign can definitely remind you of the need to maintain your agency, your independence, even in any kind of collaboration. And then later in the month, it's all about deep dives and transitions and transformations, but ones that can be very meaningful in your life indeed. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do check out your year 2025 deep dive forecast by clicking on the link beneath this video. Welcome Gemini to your in-depth monthly horoscope for November 2024 for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 Zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the month. First of all, we need to be mindful of the two luminaries, the moon and the sun. They're very close together, and later on the first day of November, come into a new moon. That's glorious for resetting your approach around the finer details of life. Because if you do make some refinements, it can have a fundamental impact on your well-being. The sixth house can be about virtue. If you have been burning the midnight oil, perhaps drinking a little bit too much, not quite getting enough exercise, the following month gives you an opportunity to reset. But you don't necessarily have to go about things in a big way. You can make a number of small adjustments. So for example, 5% improvement in the amount of sleep you're getting, 5% the amount of exercise, a 5% improvement in terms of not eating so much ready food or highly processed food and making stuff from scratch, and before you know it, you're actually making quite a significant improvement, which gives you a greater sense of well-being. The sixth house can also be where we like to help others. It can be to do with our work. But let's just take a wider lens on what's going on at the start of the month. As they go into the new moon later on the 1st, and that opportunity is presented, your ruler, Mercury, is also in the sign of Scorpio, but is opposed by Uranus, which is a very electric energy, still continuing in your 12th house. It's going to arrive in your sign next July the 7th for 4 months. Definitely something to look forwards to. But that can create some underlying tension. In fact, so much so that it can feel like almost overpowering. So just be aware, some brittle energy is to the fore at the start of this month. And one of the drivers is going to be around money or values. If your values are very different to other people, there could be a temptation to try to enforce your view, your worldview on them. And that's because Mars is in your sector of everyday values, but it's opposing Pluto in your sector of long-term resources, shared assets, finances, but also very close involvements. So they're forging a T-square back to the moon. So whether it's you who's going to be rather self-critical, someone who's a little bit critical about you, your values could come under scrutiny at the start of this month, and that can create a lot of electric energy. But you know, there is a huge opportunity in November for Geminis, because if we look at the position of Mercury, degree 27, the position of Mars, degree 28, and the position of Neptune, degree 27, they forge a grand water trine. Now, a grand water trine is brilliant for feeling things in a good and flowing and evolving way. It just so happens in terms of the house system, Mars is in 2, everyday money, resources and self-worth. Mercury's in house 6, precision, and Neptune's in house 10, how you interact with the world at large. If you're very focused on what you're trying to do, you're not trying to overextend, you're very clear on your strategy, and also you're trying to project something which is more creative, my word, you could do really well this month. What's not to like? Well, it's just at the start of the month, Venus, the planet of relating, is clashing with Saturn. It's actually forging a really strong opposition with Jupiter in your sign, which could give you a sense of optimism. But Saturn in the 10th house suggests that you could be scrutinized by people publicly in quite a powerful way. And it does suggest that certain relationships, if the ins and outs around finances between two people, or there are different values, or one party is a bit pernickety, could create some real tension. So really important as you go into this month to, whilst try to embrace that energy of the new moon in your 6th house and to try to find those improvements, that you don't be too much of a perfectionist. And one of the opportunities comes up very quickly on the 2nd when Mercury, your ruler, moves into your opposite sign. Now, from a technical viewpoint, Mercury's not at its best in Sagittarius, but I feel for you, it just helps you to take a breath, step back a little bit. And if someone does see something a bit different to you, don't necessarily see it as a personal attack. Also on the 4th, Mars, the planet of drive, passion, assertion, desire, instant gratification, moves into your 3rd house. Now that's very redolent of the core archetype of your sign, quick communication. If you give the proud Leo, the host, the energy to feed into Mars, if you've got ideas that you want to share with people that you really believe in, you can do so with a lot of thrust and conviction right through to the 6th of December, whence Mars goes into its retrograde. But just be aware that despite that opportunity with Mercury moving into your opposite sign, Mars moving into Leo, which can see a picking up in the pace, Mars and Pluto remain broadly opposite through to the middle of the month, and they come into an exact opposition on the 3rd. And if you really aren't seeing eye to eye with someone, particularly about money, it could become a very fierce debate at the very least. But you know, if you're footloose and fancy free, that's an aspect that could see you find it very difficult to ignore someone's aura, someone's magnetism. And it could be because they are very charismatic in some way or exude a kind of energy that you just find makes your pulse race quicker. So it's a really interesting energy between Mars and Pluto. You can either put people at different ends of the settee, or it could put them together in a very potentially fiery way, but in a very, very amorous way too. And having Mercury join up with Venus in your 7th house of relating on the 2nd does suggest the desire to connect more sweetly is going to be in the mix. However, Mercury does enter its pre-retrograde shadow on the 7th. Now this is really important. This is the degree that Mercury will retreat to at the very end of its retrograde. So things can slow down. So there could be some cross wires around relationships. That's going to intensify from the 26th when Mercury actually goes fully into its retrograde through to the middle of December. So if you do meet someone new from the end of this month through to then, the chances of it being a bit stop-start are greater. Also in week 2 of this month, Mercury squares up with Saturn. If you're needing to speak to someone influential, it's vital that you're not short with them, that you're not impatient, that you don't come across as someone who is a bit too cool. It's important to try to keep the warmth. Venus will help you, but I feel the square between Mercury and Saturn could see you perceived as someone who's very sharp and penetrating in what you say, and perhaps wanting things very much on your own terms. So just be mindful of that. On the 11th, however, Venus glides into the deepest part of your chart. If there is someone that it is really going well with, perhaps sparked and ignited by the Mars-Pluto opposition, it could get hotter still. Then again, you could benefit financially from someone else's success, perhaps, for example, a partner's success. But on the 15th, Saturn ends its retrograde. Saturn has been retracing its steps, and as it's retraced its steps, it's gone from about 17 degrees back to 11. And it just depends where you have influences in your natal chart. But if things have been slow around your professional aspirations, or you've been finding it more difficult to reach people in positions of influence in a way that works for you, you know, haven't quite had the perfect interview or presentation, or your own business has seemed to have just stalled a little bit, things can start to move forwards. But the 15th sees quite a tricky full moon, particularly because in week 3 of this month, the Sun and Uranus are resolutely opposed, and that's threaded through that full moon. So Uranus, the planet of surprises, but also the planet of change, the planet of higher truths, the planet that rules mythically the sky, that in your 12th house of the subconscious goes face to face with the Sun in the most practical part of your situation. So as much as that new moon at the start of the month is urging you to make some adjustments, there could be something that comes up at the heart of this month which isn't quite working out. And maybe at work, for example, someone could be surprisingly critical of you. Someone you're not expecting can turn out to have a bit of an agenda which you weren't aware of. Then again, if you've been keeping some frustration close to your chest around your work, or about a colleague, or about the organisation you work for, you may find it very difficult to keep that to yourself. You may need in some ways to release some frustration. But the 19th does see Pluto return to your sister air sign of Aquarius. We had the first blush 11 weeks in 23 from the end of March, the second blush earlier this year from the 21st of January, Pluto's birthday, through to the 2nd of September. Now we get the third opportunity. So the chances are for you, at some point over those last couple of years, you have engaged with knowledge in some kind of profound way. It could be through publishing, it could be through film, it may be through travel or philosophy or higher education, but all of those themes are going to become much more consistently part of your life future forwards. On the 21st, the Sun moves out of that 6th house of perfection into the 7th house of relation or relating. The 7th house can be where we can clear the air, where we can acknowledge that other people have a right to see things differently to us. But also, the Sun forges a brilliant link to the position of Pluto. You may meet someone at this point of the month who turns out to be very influential in your life. It could be an accountant, it could be a lawyer, it could be a life coach, it could be that you become aware of someone's philosophical teachings, it could be an astrologer. If you're really studying astrology, you find a book that really rings out to you, and that can be a very evocative energy at that point in the month. You may sign up for a course of higher education. The 26th, however, does see, as I mentioned before, your ruler go formally into its retrograde through to the middle of December. Doesn't emerge through until the 3rd of January. So just be aware that in the latter part of this year, relationships could be a little bit challenging, especially when Mars goes into its retrograde on the 6th of December in the sign of Leo, and words can get a little confused. However, as this month draws to a close, I feel that you have a chance to think about what your connections to others are. And although Venus has moved on from Sagittarius, has dived deep, that's really in a way wanting you to make sure that who you're connected to is as invested and devoted and cares as much as you do. Now, whether that is an employer, a colleague, a partnership, whether it is in a romantic situation, you want to feel that they're all in. Now that's interesting for you because traditionally you're someone who's like to be a little free, because that gives you the room to pivot into different situations and different people who intrigue you. And there could be some of that towards the end of this year. But if you are someone who's very interested in having some kind of sexual connection, just being really honest, that Mars Pluto opposition, and then at the end of the month Venus being in your 8th house, then the energy of the Sun moving into Sagittarius with Mercury there as well. That could be something you're looking for a meaningful connection in all the different strands of your situation. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Gemini. I hope you have a great November, and please do check out your year 2025 deep dive zodiac forecast, which you can click on beneath this video. Welcome Cancer to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart right at the start of the month. As ever, we need to be mindful of the location of your ruler, but also the Sun, the other luminary, and the Moon, you can see, is about to apply to the Sun later on the first day, because we have a new Moon in your sister water sign of Scorpio right at the start of this month. Now that 5th house energy can be very social, playful, creative. If you have children, their pursuits in the run up to Christmas could also be very engaging and bring you a lot of joy. But the 5th house is essentially an area that we're given a chance to have some fun. But it's just that right at the very start of this month, the Moon is forging a T-square with Mars in your own sign and also Pluto in your opposite sign. So let's just think about the archetype of Mars that's been with you since the 6th of September. It's given you the opportunity to be a bit firmer about taking a stronger grip on your life direction. Mars is not at its best in your sign, can be a bit prickly, a bit defensive, but essentially it gives you a chance to really protect your interests strongly. Assert yourself, why not? So that 1st house energy in your sign is collaborating with the Moon, which is so close to the start of your 5th house, we need to think about it as late 4th house. Then they're both interacting with Pluto in your sector of relating. So if you are feeling particularly tender around a relationship, it could show itself at the start of this month, despite that opportunity for play and fun. So just be mindful of that. But you know, Mars does play a very positive role in its link to Mercury and also Neptune at the start of this month. Now, of course, they're all located in water signs. So it's a grand water trine, delicious. And Neptune, you can see, is right at the top of your chart. So it's the closest of any planet to an angle. That means Neptune is influential this month. So your imagination, particularly around travel, higher education, spirituality, healing, could be strongly aroused. But don't be surprised if you play a leading role in driving something forwards. So your appreciation of a possibility, because the 5th house new moon can be about speculation and risk, could mean that with Mars in your sign initially this month, linking to Neptune, linking to Mercury, the planet of communication, that your sense of purpose and conviction, but also imagination, can really be something that enraptures someone you encounter. So sometimes in life, when we're in a very strident mood and we're up for taking on a challenge, we will encounter people who find that to be a difficulty. But we can also make progress. Sometimes to make progress, we have to change something. And that's where the action energy of Mars, the thinking energy of Mercury, but in the 5th house, which is very much do with using humour and you know, being able to flex into situations rapidly, they can be very good in pointing back to Neptune. So as much as Mars squaring with the Moon and opposing Pluto does have some challenges, it also has some opportunities. The one thing I will say, however, is that Uranus in your sector of friendship is in an opposition with Mercury in your 5th house. If you're feeling that your friendships or your long-term plan are not quite aligned as they might be, this is going to be a very significant month. But that energy is going to unfold later in the month, I feel, because on the 2nd, Mercury relocates. It goes into a very practical and precise area, house 6. Think of the energy of Virgo, hosted by the free-spirited energy of Sagittarius, but that Virgoan energy wants the details of things to work well, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel that that takes the emphasis away a little bit from that opposition with Uranus, which may mean that there's some choices for you right at the start of this month, perhaps romantically, perhaps socially, perhaps in terms of some of your direction of travel. But on the 3rd, that opposition between Mars and Pluto reaches an absolute peak. It's been slowly but surely growing through the last week of October. It's going to go on through to the 13th of this month within 3 degrees. And of course, Mars does change signs to your 2nd solar house on the 4th of this month, which suggests whatever you've been trying to achieve since the 6th of September, you could start to get some evidence of how well you're doing as early as the day after this opposition between Mars and Pluto. But if you're in any kind of toxic relationship, or you're having to deal with someone who is a bit unbending, unwielding, likes to have power over you, it could really frustrate you at the start of this month, to be honest. And that all points towards where this is leading to by the time of the full moon at the heart of the month. But I want to reassure you at the start of this month, there are huge possibilities, with the new moon, with that glorious grand trine, particularly if you're open to try things differently. But on the 7th, Mercury goes into its pre-retrograde shadow. So if you're not really on the ball when it comes to details, that could snag you right through to the 3rd of January. So whether it's to do with appointments, whether it's to do with annual inoculations that you need to have, or even a pet, to be honest, because house 6, where Mercury is, very much to do with pets. But anything to do with those small details will be important, even if you've got a life plan which is much more grandiose and much more dramatic and much more creative. You still need to deliver things in a precise way, and that's critical from the 7th onwards through, as I say, to the first week of January. But you get a fantastic event on the 11th of this month. Venus, the planet of relation, but also of money, moves into your 7th house, and also the sign of Capricorn. Hey, guess what? That's where Pluto's been causing all that mischief since 2008. If you've gone through some very powerful relationship battles of will, people have come and gone in your life, if you've cut away from certain individuals thinking that was the right thing to do, Pluto may have encouraged you to be very strong, perhaps even all the way to ruthless. Venus moving into this area is ironic, just as Pluto is about to make way on the 19th into Aquarius for the rest of our lifetimes, in terms of, it's not going back into Capricorn in our lifetimes. It depends how old you are. And of course, Pluto will be in Aquarius initially to 243, then back into 244 before leaving. But if there is a relationship that you want to really work on, you have a glorious window of opportunity for those days from the 11th through to the 19th. So essentially that's 1 week. And so if there is someone you're really drawn towards, the charm and diplomacy of Venus can help you to prize open the opportunity. What's not to like? Well, it's just that Saturn and Mercury are not on good terms in week 2 of this month. What's the implication of that? Saturn's in the part of your situation to do with freedom. Now, we never think about Saturn about freedom, do we? But remember, Neptune's emphasising that with the grand water trine at the start of the month. But if there's a situation that you feel boxed in, and your options are limited, maybe it's to do with your job, which is too routine, too mundane, that will become much more apparent in your thinking. But that's why Venus moving into your 7th house is significant in that 1 week, because it could, the combination of the two energies, which are very different, could push you to go to an interview, perhaps meet up with someone you really like, because in a way the Saturn Mercury square makes you more aware of something that's not working for you. And that's emphasized furthermore from the 15th, when Saturn goes direct. If you have been feeling something over the last 5 months hasn't really quite felt right, it may have been a job you've had, it may have been a hobby, maybe you travelled somewhere and it didn't turn out to be as enriching as you would have liked. You're going to make sense of it all with Saturn going direct, but on the same day, at the heart of this month, we have the full moon in Taurus. And this is what I was alluding to earlier, because Uranus is so close to it, but then in week 3, the Sun and Uranus are in opposition. And that really gives you the big crossroads moment. Do you do something which liberates you to be the person that Uranus has been prompting you to become full-time since March 2019, which is much less caught up in keeping your life conservative and safe, which is a big part of your nature. Security is important to us all. We're living in a fast-changing world, and it's important to feel that there is that protective shield. But there's another part of you that Uranus has been evoking to try different things, meet different people, consider different viewpoints. And all that comes up to the boil through that full moon and in week 3 of this month. Very dramatic energy, because whether it's a relationship you're in, a friendship you're in, a job you don't enjoy, if you don't see a long-term plan, which is the moon in your 11th house, Uranus is pushing you to take the risk of breaking free, which could be hugely cathartic, but at the same time a little bit scary. Just know on the 19th, the arrival of Pluto in your 8th house means that some things that perhaps you've collaborated on, worked on, and tried to find the midpoint between what you need and someone else needs for a long time, it reaches a point. You've had 2 practice runs of Pluto in house 8, but because the Sun moves on the 21st into the most practical area, joining up with Mercury, but linked to Pluto, if something in your world could be improved, perhaps by greater self-discipline, perhaps by some more virtuous approaches, perhaps a new job comes along that maybe is better paid, but some kind of big shift can really see this be a seminal moment of the whole year, I feel. And then with Mercury going retrograde formally for 19 days from the 26th, it won't come out of that till mid-December, but it won't come out of the post-retrograde shadow until the 3rd of January. So those details that I mentioned before, or something changing around the core everyday fabric of your world, it's important to really micromanage that, because I feel you may find yourself deciding to do something that's very fresh. And if you have been someone who has not played safe, but just been very sensible, because Cancer people can be very, very good managers, you know, whether it's in your own home or domestic situation, or professionally, or in a corporation as a manager, an executive. Cancerians often are very skilled at that. But I feel that if Uranus is evoking within you a desire for something really fresh, the reality of any change you might decide to make will show itself very rapidly towards the end of this month. But right at the start of this month, remember that new moon is suggesting that life should be about fun, and it should be about enjoying yourself. Hold that message in your mind as you make your decisions as this month unfolds. It's been a pleasure being with you, Cancer. Thank you so much for joining me. please do see the link beneath this video where you can watch your year 2025 deep dive video. Welcome Leo to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm sharing your event chart right at the start of the month. As ever, we need to be mindful of your ruler, the sun. The moon's very close to the sun. They're going to come into an alliance later on the 1st with the new moon. However, as this month begins, the moon is in a tense T-square with both Pluto and also Mars. Mars for you is in the 12th house, Pluto the 6th. Now those two are going to be big players this month, coming into an exact opposition on the 3rd before Mars makes its way into your sign on the 4th. That's really exciting because if you recall from the 6th of September, Mars is possibly been causing some mischief. You may have found that your emotions were rather up and down since that point. Mars moving into your own sign will bring you into the moment, but not before. It does go face to face with Pluto, and those two are in a tense relationship with the moon as this month begins. So the moon and the sun and the new moon is all about how things feel. It's about your sense of security. It's about your home life, family relationships. It's also about the sense of protectiveness and security that you have in your life. So if you want to transform where you live, perhaps by redecoration, or perhaps moving furniture around, or decluttering, or perhaps moving all together, the new moon gives you an opportunity to reset in a really positive way these parts of your situation. But your professional interactions are going to be a big part of this month's story too. Now that's represented by the sign of Taurus, and you can see that Uranus is right up there in the 10th house. And generally since March 2019, Uranus has been pushing, prodding, prompting you to be more experimental when it comes to your interaction with the world at large. But it starts this month in an opposition with Mercury in your 4th house. So if those family and emotional constraints or strands are in some ways preventing you from seizing a golden prize professionally, that could create some frustration. Now the other thing to tell you about is that at the start of this month, Mars, just in house 12, does link well to Mercury and also Neptune. That's a grand water trine. So it's important for all of us to be in touch with how things feel. This new moon at the start of the month, certainly reminding your sign of this, but it's also important to tune in to perhaps past skills and talents with Mars's help. They could be in some ways repurposed into the here and now. You could even find yourself thinking about working from home for some Leos, but the way you connect to others, the 8th house financially, is where Neptune is, but Saturn's been there since March 2023. So finances, shared resources or income may have been a bit constrained. So if there is something that you've had an interest in, an enjoyment of, a hobby, a craft, that could in some ways be repurposed to give you some extra income, this month gives you an opportunity to work on it from the very base of your home, but also adapting those demands to your more personal needs too. However, on the 2nd of this month, we have a bright and sparkly change because Mercury moves into your sister fire sign of Sagittarius. Mercury in house 5 is much more playful and free-spirited, can also be a little mischievous. If things have felt a bit muted or a bit more focused on the core of your existence. It's an opportunity to take a breath and check in with others. But I feel that what helps you to do that more than anything else, Leo, is the arrival of Mars in your sign. I can't stress enough how Mars in the 12th house can be quite challenging. Mars is about drive, it's about passion, it is about assertion, it can be about desire, but it also can be about anger. And the 12th house is a very psychological home for Mars to have been in Cancer. And of course, Mars isn't at its best in Cancer. It's known as being in its fall. It could be a bit niggly, a bit defensive. If some moments since the 6th of September have seen you a little bit out of sorts, uncharacteristically, now you know why. But Mars moving into your sign through to the 6th of December gives you a chance to really show that charisma, that warmth, that sheer personality power that's a huge part of who you are, to turn it up to max. So if you have been doubting yourself, this is an opportunity to reset the dial in a really constructive way. Just letting you know that Mars will go into a retrograde on the 6th of December, and it will rotate back into the sign of Cancer later in January. In fact, through till the 19th of April, Mars will go back into your 12th house. So there still may be some old issues that Mars is asking you to look at, to clean through, to let go and release. Perhaps old grudges, resentments, hurts, disappointments that may still be just somehow or another washing around in the depths of your very being. But for the most part, Mars moving into your own sign gives you the opportunity to step into the moment and be more dynamic. The 7th, however, sees Mercury go into its pre-retrograde shadow. Now in the 5th house, there's a chance to meet up with people and mingle. There could be some cross wires. That could get stronger from the 26th when Mercury goes fully retrograde through to the middle of December. And then it won't be until the 3rd of January next year that it straightens itself out and emerges from the retrograde. So what I would say to you is that when it comes to social opportunities, just be aware that things could be a little fluid. But on the 11th, we have Venus making its way into Capricorn. Capricorn is a very practical sign, ruled by Saturn. It's an earth sign, of course. Can be quite ambitious. Can be very much to do with work. If you are a creative and you've got a job that you're really invested in, you can be very productive with this transition, so that's good. 15th sees Saturn go direct. If finance has been quite a tender issue for about 5 months, particularly shared finances, or an old income source is dried up, you can start to sort the thing out now, from now onwards. However, the 15th is what I was referring to earlier with the full moon. So this is in your 10th house, which is your connection to the world. But when the moon's in the 10th house, it's very much more difficult to disguise how we feel. Now, if you're one of those Leos who does have a strong need to protect your profile and you're very proud, you could find that if something does come out into the open in the following 2 weeks, that it makes you feel quite vulnerable. But in a more dramatic way, what the full moon conjunct Uranus can do, and the sun's opposition to Uranus in week 3 of this month, is see you trying to find the balance between something you want to do that liberates you to do something more daring, with making sure that you're looking after the roots of your life, particularly if you're someone who's very much the caregiver at the core of your existence. But the 19th sees Pluto return to your 7th house. Think of 11 weeks from the end of March in 23. Think of since 21 January this year to 2nd September. Relationships became much more important to you, but also how you meet people, how you meet the world. The 7th house in traditional astrology is open enemies. I don't mean that in a sinister way, that's just the way the texts were written. But those are the people that we need to compete with. It can be the people we need to be combative with. It can be competitors. It can be the public. It's just having the confidence to interact. It can be about relationships. But the 21st sees the Sun move into your sister fire sign of Sagittarius, but linked back to Pluto. If there is someone on your horizon that you really like, and you have a date around that time, it could, even if someone close to you is not particularly approving, it could really be quite the connection. But with Mercury going fully retrograde on the 26th for 19 days, yeah, there can be some changes of plan for sure. I also should say to you that Mercury, as it moves forwards in Sagittarius, in week 2 does square off to Saturn. Even if you've got an idea which you feel has got a lot of scope and you're feeling that you want to go forwards with it, even speculative, just be aware that Saturn's asking you to perhaps be a little bit more erring on the side of caution. But by the end of this month, I feel that the passion of having Mars back in your sign, which of course is fire, having the Sun move into Sagittarius, fire, and playfulness, that 5th house, very much to do with where we can mix and mingle, where Mercury moved into on the 2nd, they're really saying to you that a big shift of dimension and emphasis has occurred. So the start of this month is very much about how things feel, security and stability, competing against another part of you that wants to try something different and fresh. However, the opposition between Mars and Pluto could see something come into the open, particularly professionally, which is a bit uncomfortable. You may discover that someone is quite critical or not actually as honest and straightforward and decent as you would like. But that latter energy in the further part of this month gives you a chance to reset in a way which has not been possible since 2008. And to be honest, it is all about Pluto. Pluto can deconstruct, but it can reconstruct. Yes, it can be about power, but it can also be about positive power. And it's asking you to step forwards along with Pluto, linking back to Mars in your sign, to step forwards with greater confidence into the future that you deserve to have. Because I feel since 2008 you have made a lot of sacrifices, a lot of energy's been put into supporting and helping other people. It's your chance now to start to enjoy how you feel and connect to others as this month draws to a close. Please join me for your year 2025 deep dive Zodiac forecast by clicking on the link beneath this video. Have a great month, Leo. Take care and goodbye. Welcome, Virgo, to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 Zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart right at the start of the month. As ever, we need to be mindful of the two luminaries, the Sun and the Moon, but also your ruling planet of Mercury. Now, the Moon's just about to apply in an exact conjunction with the Sun as we enter November with the new Moon. But right at the start of the day, the Moon is squaring off to both Mars and also Pluto, so a T-square. Now, the opposition between Mars and Pluto is one of the big events of this month. You can see that Mars is in your 11th house as this month begins. That's very much about your future plans, your group interactions, your network, but also it's your higher principles. It can be to do with good fortune. Mars in Cancer can be a bit sensitive, sometimes a bit defensive. But that opposition between the position of Mars and Pluto suggests that keeping all of the people happy all of the time could prove to be something of a challenge as you come into this new month. Yet on the face of it, with your ruler Mercury sparkling away in your 3rd house, which gives it a very Gemini kind of vibe at the start of the month, That suggests some quick moving and exciting news sharing. And it's true that Mercury is in an opposition with Uranus. Uranus right at the top of your chart in the ninth house, so very influential, very close to that angle. And that's saying to you that how you proceed in terms of your interests needs to have a sense of variety and stimulation to keep you engaged. But you could find yourself feeling a little bit highly strung as you go into this new month. And if you do encounter a friend or perhaps someone you're more romantically involved with who has different values to you, I feel that that's what could come out right at the start of the month because of the moon in a disassociate way being in a T-square with that opposition. But, ironically, Mercury, your ruler, forges a gorgeous alliance with Mars, but also Neptune. Neptune's in the part of your chart to do with relationships. If there is a friend that you can collaborate with, that you do have that sense of connection, maybe you can bring different qualities to complement one another, there are and are going to be some opportunities this month. But what about that new moon on the 1st? A third house new moon is likely to see an increase in the pace of life. If you're up for that, that can create some extra excitement. Think about what you want to achieve over the next 6 months in terms of learning, sharing ideas you've got, perhaps a new mode of transport, perhaps you want to update your technology in some way, whether it's through software or through some hardware. And that combination can certainly spur you on. But when it comes to a family relationship, the fact that Venus and Saturn are in a square does point towards some potential complications, particularly as your ruler on the 2nd will move into Sagittarius to join up with Venus. Now initially Venus is squaring with Saturn, but Mercury is going to repeat that square in the 2nd week of this month, and that can create some tensions. For example, if you're trying to discuss upcoming arrangements for the festivities, you might find that someone seems cool, a bit detached, maybe a little unpresent, which could feel frustrating for you. However, by the 3rd, the opposition between Mars and Pluto, which has been building up through the last week of September, reaches a furnace-like peak. If we think about what the planets represent, they're the co-rulers of the sign of Scorpio, so Scorpio energy very much to the fore this month, and that can be intense, it can be direct, it can be unbending, it can be quite confrontational. So if something around your future, in terms of a friendship or a romance, isn't quite chiming with you in terms of the conversation about that, that could all come to a boil at this point. Also on the 4th, Mars moves into your 12th house. It's going to be there through in forward direction to the 6th of December. It then will go into a retrograde. So the last part of this year is going to see some old issues potentially come into the open. You may be surprised if some past incidents, perhaps you had an accident, perhaps you had an angry exchange or separation with someone in your past. You may have felt that your relationship to those events had been completed, that you'd come to a point of peace. But you may find with Mars in the 12th house that old energies can get stirred up, and that can actually be quite challenging. Just be aware of that. And of course, Mars still, even in Leo, retains a broad opposition to Pluto in the part of your chart to do with your love life or creative situation. But then you can use Mars in the 12th house in a productive way. Are there old skills and talents or even an old contact which could be reused or redeployed in a more imaginative way? You also have on the 7th your ruler going into its pre-retrograde shadow. So that's when Mercury starts to slow down in your 4th house. But having Venus there too at this point for the next few days could see you thinking a lot about your home and emotional situation. The great news, however, is that on the 11th, Venus moves to join up briefly with Pluto in your 5th house. If you are happily ensconced in a relationship, you can certainly celebrate it for the following week with Venus and Pluto together in that area. It brings a greater sense of understanding of the benefits of that involvement. But equally, if you don't have a relationship and you'd like to have one and have perhaps gone through some big events since 2008 with Pluto in Capricorn, and also over the last couple of years with Saturn in your 7th house, you could feel quite mournful in some ways, particularly with Mars in that 12th house. But all of this is giving you the opportunity to clear the decks for a new beginning, a new fresh beginning. And if you are footloose and fancy free, Venus being in Capricorn can certainly give your sense of attractiveness and allure a huge boost, so do enjoy its attentions. On the 15th, your relationship sector also gets a release with Saturn going forwards. It's tracking back over the previous 5 months has probably made some involvement seem rather serious or rather onerous. But on the same day, ironically, we have a full moon in your sister Earth sign of Taurus, but that's very close to Uranus. And in week 3, the Sun faces up to Uranus. So if there is a situation that you do feel hemmed in by, that you feel is not allowing you to breathe, it could be a job, it could be a responsibility, could be an obligation, or it could be a relationship, you may find yourself wanting to break free really quite spontaneously. Now, it's not like you to do something without a great deal of thought, but don't forget this month begins with the potential for intensity and a lot of electricity, and I feel the Sun going opposite Uranus and threaded through that full moon ramps up that potential once more. Mars being in the 12th house can also see us want to close down something. Mars can be about desire, so it could be around an attraction you've had. But on the 19th, with Pluto moving into Aquarius for the 3rd time, we had 11 weeks in 23, from the 21st of January this year to the 2nd of September. It's going to shine a light on a part of your situation which usually you have a reputation of having working very efficiently, which is everyday structures, the basic organisation of your situation, your approach to health and fitness, your work. But you know, Pluto has a tendency to reveal things that we may not necessarily see. So, for example, your understanding and perception of your relationship to these parts of your life could go through huge transformations through to 2043 and 44 as Pluto makes its way through Aquarius, because Pluto is about transformation. It can be about control, it can be about power, but essentially it's about what needs to transform. Sometimes Pluto will guide us towards something that needs changing and we'll resist it. But what can happen then is it can create issues. If we go with the flow and accept that sometimes, even if we don't feel quite ready for an alteration, that alteration can be profoundly good for us. So, for example, you might be in a job that you feel is very steady, gives you a lot of what you need, but it doesn't at heart really fulfill you. And that can be the type of situation that Pluto calls out to you about, pushing you to be more experimental and open to a different opportunity. Same with your approach to fitness, diet, health. You may have some pretty well calibrated approaches, but they could all be up for further review. And if you're open to it, you can go with the flow in a really positive way. But on the 21st, the Sun moves to join up with Mercury in the sign of Sagittarius. The 4th house, very much to do with how we feel about things, our family relationships, anything to do with protectiveness and shelter and security. But on the 26, Mercury in this area goes into a retrograde. It's not going to emerge from that until mid December, but also it won't emerge from the post-retrograde shadow until early next year. So it is going to be really important that you're diving deep and understanding the needs that you have in terms of where you live, who with and how, but also getting much more penetrated into your inner emotional world. So with Mars in the 12th house, the Sun and Mercury in retrograde in your 4th house, this is a huge opportunity for personal growth. And also the Sun does forge a great link with Pluto as it moves into Sagittarius, a sextile. And if you did, for example, wanted to work from home, or you wanted to use your natural talent for hobby crafting and making, you wanted to make that a bigger part of your existence, there's a great chance to embrace that as this month draws to a close. But if you are trying to tie down some Christmas arrangements, I feel those energies could mean that they could prove to be somewhat elusive as this month draws to a close. Have a great month, Virgo, and please do check out your year 2025 deep dive video by clicking on the link beneath this one. Welcome Libra to your in-depth monthly horoscope for November 2024 for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the month. As October came to a close, the moon was in your sign, but it did go into 2 right angles with Mars and Pluto, a T-square, and that's still prevalent as we come into this new month, although the moon has moved on and is about to apply to the sun later on the first day for the new moon. The new moon gives you an opportunity to take the ideas that you've been generating over the last month and form them up over the next month in a more substantive way. So that's the foundations. It also helps you to think seriously about your finances, but also your sense of self-worth and values. So all of those themes will be boosted by that new moon. But that clash between Mars and Pluto, which the moon in your sign got caught up in, well, that is a very powerful opposition, and that reaches a peak on the 3rd of this month. So let's just take a look at that. Mars is asking you, and has been since the 6th of September, to take your talents more seriously. But that also has asked you to raise your profile, be more assertive. But the thing is, when Mars and Pluto are in opposition, one of the traps we can fall into is almost trying too hard and being a little bit too willful, particularly in trying to get our own way. It is a very potent planetary opposition. For you, it could be about trying to balance your work and home situation. And I think it's important to stay mindful of the support you're getting from other people in your situation, if that's the case. If you're not getting the support you really need, that could prove to be somewhat frustrating in the early part of this month. And although Venus, your ruler, is in the free-spirited Sagittarius, and for you in the chatty 3rd house, if you have got some comments to share, they're likely to be a little bit more acerbic because of the square to Saturn. Indeed, on the 2nd of this month, Mercury moves on from an electric opposition to Uranus right at the start of the month, which could see you a little bit impulsive about money, and joins up with Venus in the sign of Sagittarius. But that too is going to square up with Saturn in week 2. So your thinking and also your mode of communication, often very diplomatic, could be much more direct in the early part of this month. In fact, you may need to assert yourself, or feel you need to assert yourself, in a much more impactful way. Just be aware the North Node in your 7th house gives you an opportunity to still tune into people in the skillful way for which you're known. It's just that your values, with the Sun in a quincunx with the North Node, just be aware that your values may not necessarily chime with whoever you're dealing with. Now, whether that's at work, professionally, or perhaps in local organisations that you may contribute to, or in your personal situation, the potential for tension is very strong at the start of this month. And I guess the new moon in Scorpio could see you be a little bit more attached to your values, or more attached to your attitude around finances. But as long as you know that, that helps you to navigate the potential challenges and seize the opportunities. And the big one comes on the 4th, because Mars moves out of that 10th house and moves into house 11, which is much more to do with networking, building up the group. You can still be individualistic, you can still stand out for what you want, but you just have a little bit of a lighter touch. It's still in a broad opposition with Pluto, so you could still feel quite emotional, particularly if you're born quite late in Libra, about certain situations, but a much more social dimension comes in through to the end of the year with Mars's support. However, on the 7th, Mercury, which moves into the sign of Sagittarius on the 2nd, joining up with Venus, that goes into its pre-retrograde shadow. So whether you're thinking about buying some new technology, a new mode of transport, or you're communicating with someone, there could be some snags between now and the 3rd of January. Why is that? Well, Mercury goes into its retrograde on the 26th this month. It emerges from that mid-December, but it won't be until the 3rd of January that it comes out of its post-retrograde shadow. Now on the 11th, your ruler Venus moves into your 4th house. So for 1 week, it's going to be anchored in the same sign as Pluto. Pluto moves back to Aquarius for the 3rd time on the 19th, but that 1 week could see you do something around a property matter that gives you some kind of very significant step forwards. It may be decorative, it may be to do with your furnishings, it could be to do with getting family members together, it could be a powerful discussion or emotional energy that you have around the security part of your life. But Venus certainly gives you a chance to appreciate the people who are in your life in a meaningful way. Now on the 15th, Saturn goes direct. If you have found over the last 5 months your physical vitality has been low, or the demands of life have been particularly high, it wouldn't be a surprise. That tension can be released, but there is also on the 15th a full moon. And that full moon influences the other sign, like you, that's ruled by Venus, Taurus. And it's very close to Uranus. So for you, that's house 8, but the Sun goes opposite Uranus in week 3, threaded through that full moon. So for the following couple of weeks, you may find yourself being particularly rebellious when it comes to your resources. Now, if you are in a close relationship and you feel that a partner tends to want to impose their values or their constraints on you, you could find yourself really wanting to do what you need to do for you. Now, if you don't need to confer with anyone else, you may decide to spoil yourself and can find a big ticket item or something with a little bit of luxury that really calls out to you and decide to splurge. Of course, it could be that you're going to come up with some imaginative ideas around your Christmas gift selection. But the full moon here can also make you much more aware of long-term financial relationships and involvements or costs, and Uranus being in the mix could see you want to release yourself from them. So that could be paying off debt, it could be coming to a debt, some kind of debt repayment plan, something which gives you some freedom from the demands. The 19th, as I mentioned, sees Pluto return to Aquarius, which for you is glorious, because on the 21st the Sun joins up with Mercury in your 3rd house. You're going to see a speeding up, but also it's an opportunity to start to enjoy the more social dimension in a much more powerful way. Yes, Mercury does go retrograde, as I mentioned, on the 26th, and yes, that can cause some snags, crosswires and misunderstandings, but generally you get an opportunity, a window of opportunity to have some enjoyment and some pleasures, because there's little doubt that the start of this month with that new moon in Scorpio, very much focused on everyday finance and self-worth values. The full moon opposing that in the middle of the month is very much to do with longer term finances. Those two influences could be very much to do with a close romantic relationship. If it's going well, the new moon can see you come together in a more unified way. If a relationship isn't going so well, the full moon at the heart of the month conjunct Uranus may see you want to break free. It just depends on your unique circumstances. But whatever your situation, there is going to be the chance to have some greater fun, freedom and social interaction, particularly with Mars in your 11th house as this month draws to a close. It just may be with Mercury retrograde that things are rather fluid. Have a great November, Libra, and please do check out your year 2025 deep dive video forecast by clicking the link beneath this video. Welcome, Scorpio, to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. It's an incredibly powerful start to the month with a huge scorpionic theme. On screen now, I'm sharing your event chart. Now, of course, we have the new moon on the 1st in your sign. Always an opportunity to showcase your individual talents. Over the next month, do take seriously any strands you have ongoing that could require or benefit from an extra spark of vitality and enthusiasm. But it's also an opportunity to recast your personal identity. Be more strident about new ideas that you have, perhaps getting some off the ground. But we must be mindful of your two rulers because they start this month pretty well in direct opposition. That becomes exact on the 3rd, and in fact through to the middle of this month they are really face to face. Now Mars is going to be moving on the 4th into a very powerful area, and if you're wanting to make progress professionally, that's your opportunity to raise your profile in a very potent way. But let's just be mindful that Mars is very close to that 10th house cusp. Any planet which is close to an angle is likely to be influential. So this is a month where you may be determined to have your voice heard. Now you can be quite direct at times, but there's another more nuanced part of your nature which can be quite private. But this is a month when if you have ideas or beliefs that you feel passionately about, you're going to be in the space to articulate that message with conviction, determination and willpower. So it's exciting stuff. You also have Mercury right at the start of the month in an electric opposition with Uranus. So even if it does mean being a little more controversial or making a surprise move or showing people that you can be very innovative in your approach, or perhaps around a relationship, doing something that's more dramatic, all of that can be informed by Mercury opposite Uranus. Now later in the month there is going to be a full moon in your opposite sign of Taurus. That's on the 15th, and that's very much about relationships. But then the sun will go in an opposition with Uranus for the following week. So week 3 can see a lot of electricity around relationships. So if you're wanting to take the initiative at the start of this month in the way that I feel you will, it could create some waves, particularly if you're in a sleepy relationship which perhaps needs some kind of spark to reignite it, or perhaps you're in a tie that's not really working for you, or if you're single or you'd not like to meet someone you can collaborate with around a hobby or a business idea. There's lots of potential for that this month, but I think the thing you're going to be doing most of all is seizing the initiative. Because, Scorpio, there's also a grand water trine right at the start of this month between Mercury in your sign, Mars, but also Neptune. Neptune's in a very creative part of your chart. Mercury in your own sign, giving you that encouragement to make a step forwards, particularly with Uranus in opposition, and not be so worried about what other people think. And with Mars so high in your chart, giving you that confidence to raise your game and also your profile. But on the 2nd, Mercury makes its way out of your sign and into the sign of Sagittarius. Now, you start this month with Venus in that area, and that can be good for finance. Mercury move in here can give you even greater desire to improve your lot. Just be aware, however, that Venus is confronted by Saturn at the start of this month. I wouldn't be too free and easy with resources. Also, if there's someone you're strongly attracted to, avoid grand gestures. Mercury squares up with Saturn in week 2. If you are thinking that you want to be more speculative with your resources in terms of a business idea, do make sure you really do your research. But on the 4th, Mars climbs right into the top of your chart. Mars in Cancer really loves attention. Don't be surprised if through to the end of this year you are much more seeking of recognition and acknowledgement. But if you are someone who runs a little bit on the shy or perhaps the reserve side, that can be all to the good, because it can give you that extra push to seize the limelight. If you're someone who's much more comfortable working with people and networking and showcasing your talents, this is a chance to really turn up the volume, so do go for it. We do have on the 7th, however, Mercury going into its pre-retrograde shadow in your 2nd house. Through to the 3rd of January next year, financial affairs, although they're boosted by Venus broadly, you've seen that Saturn is moderating Venus. So with the retrograde beginning on the 26th of this month in your sector of everyday money, do marshal your resources in a very finite way. But on the 11th, Venus moves into Capricorn. Don't underestimate just how much impact you can have upon others with your topics that you're discussing, but also just your tone. The way you come across could captivate someone, particularly in the following week, as Pluto spends its last week in our lifetimes in your 3rd house. Think back to 2008. It's probable that since then, your thinking, ideas, connections to neighbours, your immediate environment, even siblings, has gone through some kind of significant shift. You're going to see what the outcome of all of that is in the week following the 11th. Now on the 15th, Saturn goes direct. If your love life has felt a little muted over the last 5 months, or you have felt a little bit disconnected from people, or your social world has not been quite as sparkly as it could, things can ease on the same day that is that full moon in your opposite sign. So that's all about relationships. Over the next couple of weeks, you're going to be asked some questions. It may be that someone's objecting to your single-mindedness that you've been showing at the start of this month. Now, they may have a valid point if they've not seen much of you. Now, you may feel that what you're occupying yourself with is ultimately for their benefit, but it's all about keeping people in the loop. And someone could surprise you by their move. So with Uranus in the 7th house on this particular full moon, don't take any relationship for granted, for sure. However, if you are wanting to take that step of asking someone out on a date or connecting to someone online, Uranus very much to do with technology, I feel. Maybe the energies of the Sun opposing Uranus in week 3 just give you that push to be more daring. The 19th, however, sees Pluto return to Aquarius. We've had 2 visits so far. through to 2043-44, your home and emotional life could change hugely. If you have been involved in a renovation or a home move over the last year or so, wouldn't be a surprise. If you're about to get involved with one, neither would that be a surprise either. The fourth house is where we live, but it's also in terms of Pluto where things can be deconstructed but also revived. If your family life, for example, has not been quite as good as it could be, an opportunity to rebirth it. If there's something that hasn't been working for you, perhaps Pluto's asking to think about the process of change, because that's what Pluto is about, change and transformation. But it can be to do with Renaissance too. The 21st sees the Sun move out of your sign and into Sagittarius. Here it's asking you to think about the aforementioned resources. But Mercury goes retrograde on the 26th, but just know the Sun forges a great link to Pluto. So there is a chance to benefit from some kind of opportunity around a property rental or purchase, or perhaps a room rental. And it could be a change which actually gives you a greater sense of security, and that's definitely to be celebrated. As the month draws to a close, therefore, finances will need that particular care and management because of the Mercury retrograde, but it's also a chance to rethink what some of your values are, your attitudes to finance. Could there be some shifts there? The new moon in your sign at the start of this month certainly creates a lot of excitement and potential, Scorpio. It's all about you having the confidence to take centre stage. Not everyone's going to get it, but when it comes to conversations this month, I think they can be quite strident. But if you are someone with a message that you want to share to a wider audience, Mars gives you a glorious opportunity to raise your profile. Have a great month. Please check out your year 2025 deep dive video forecast by seeing the link beneath this video. Welcome Sagittarius to your in-depth monthly horoscope for November 2024 for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 Zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart right at the start of the month. There's a very tender and very sensitive new moon manifesting on the first day in the sign of Scorpio. Scorpio is very much about what's not necessarily obvious. It can be to do with transformations. A 12th house new moon does need us to embrace it, because the 12th house is the part of life that we can feel a little fearful of. Psychology, our subconscious, maybe to do with the parts of life that we're even a little fearful about. But if you're prepared to bring those in to being part of you, there's a huge opportunity here to bring some healing, peace, and also rest and relaxation into your situation. Now that new moon forges a quincunx with the North Node, the point of destiny, but that's in a glorious location for you still, the 5th house. Very much to do with creativity, but also can be to do with romance. If there is someone who's creeping up on your senses and you're single, be guided by your 6th sense. That's what that new moon's asking you to do. Tune in to your psychic antenna. Don't ignore any inner hunches. And whether it is demonstrating your flair or artistry or talents, or it is in terms of your social situation, let those instincts guide you, and then you'll be working that new moon into your situation in the best way possible. Now also at the start of the month, Mercury is about to join your sign, but it is in an opposition with Uranus. It could therefore be that you feel a little bit restless, or even dare I say agitated right at the start of this month. But once Mercury moves into your sign on the 2nd, that can ease. And just be aware that Venus, the planet of attraction, is in your sign at the start of the month. Now it is forging a broad square with Saturn. It's possible that you're going to want to give your personal appearance some kind of upgrade. Now, it could be if you're a dedicated follower of fashion, you just need a few new pieces in your wardrobe to give your sense of well-being and allure a lift. But when it comes to someone you're attracted to, just again with Saturn in your 4th house, a bit like the new moon in your 12th house, guided by how it feels. But Mercury moving to join up with Venus in your sign is an opportunity to think about your individual talents and dive deep with the spiritual resources of that 12th house to pull into the open any hidden or unused talents that perhaps have lain dormant. So really exciting stuff. But at the start of this month and peaking on the 3rd, we do have an opposition between Mars and Pluto. Now these are the two rulers of Scorpio, so this amps up the scorpionic energy. Now for you, this opposition goes across your 2nd and 8th houses. If there is someone on your celestial radar that you're finding very hard to ignore, you could find yourself propelled towards them in some kind of intense but irresistible way. It's an aspect which can create a lot of desire. Equally, if there is an item that calls out to you, you could find yourself more impulsive about splashing out on it. But just be aware that the opposition between Mars and Pluto can create a lot of politics. If there is a situation that you're discussing that's financial, and it does include a partnership of some kind. Now, partnerships can be with who we bank with, as much as a romantic partner or a business partner. But if you or someone you're dealing with sees things in a radically different way, it can create a lot of intensity. But on the 4th, Mars gives you an opportunity for liberation because it moves into your sister fire sign of Leo. Now through to Christmas, you can end this year wanting to be a lot more adventurous. Now it just so happens that Mars does go into a retrograde in December, so enjoy this initial period. It is still going to be broadly opposite Pluto through to the 13th, so everyday money can feed into a desire to be more escapist or independent or adventurous. So if you are feeling that you want to be a bit more gung-ho with your money, just be aware that that could have some implications. But on the 7th, Mercury in your sign goes into its pre-retrograde shadow, preparing for the retrograde which begins on the 26th. Now, we've seen over the last couple of years lots of Mercury retrogrades in Sagittarius, which can tend to affect distribution, particularly in terms of the food chain, but also in terms of transport and long haul journeys. So if you are wanting to travel any time during this month, it will be important to meticulously plan it. Obviously, none of us completely can control things like industrial disputes that affect ports and airports, but what we can do is make sure that we plan our contingencies. However, on the 11th of this month, Venus makes its way out of your sign and into Capricorn. I think you can enjoy some genuine financial fortune at this time. But just at the same time, Mercury in Sagittarius does square up with Saturn. So even if you're trying to do something new and fresh, your home or emotional circumstances may still have a bearing on your freedom of action. But Venus moving into Capricorn is certainly something to savour. If you have found that finances have been somewhat traumatic since 2008, since Pluto moved into Capricorn, you have an opportunity to see how far you've come in the week from the 11th. If you've really applied yourself, gone with all the changes that Pluto has really instigated for you, you can see some genuine improvement. That could be around a property matter on the 15th, as Saturn goes direct. That long retrograde in your 4th house may have meant that your emotional life has felt muted, difficult, rather restrained in some way, perhaps through no fault of your own. It may be your physical place where you live, maybe it's the people you share with, maybe it's the lack of space, or perhaps you're living somewhere that doesn't work for you in terms of the environment. But Saturn going direct is very welcome. But on the 15th, the other influence that's been so powerful for you since 2019 is Uranus in your 6th house. Lots of changes around work and routines, which may have felt very disruptive. So the full moon, which occurs on that day, suggests there could be more to come over the next couple of weeks. But if you're someone who's very visionary, which Sagittarians often can be, particularly around technology, you could get a chance to go for a job which can be really good for you, but it may mean overcoming any inner self-doubts or confidence issues that perhaps have been manifested by that Scorpio new moon. But on the 19th, Pluto returns to Aquarius for the 3rd time. It's going to link to the Sun's arrival in your sign on the 21st in a sextile. That's fantastic. But just before the Sun reaches you, it is in a direct opposition with Uranus. So if you aren't feeling very happy around your work, you could feel particularly affected, and life can feel very, perhaps even all the way to chaotic for the week before the Sun's move. But once it does move, despite Mercury's retrograde on the 26th, things can really start to make sense for you. You have entered a new epoch. Pluto's not going back into Capricorn in our lifetime. It's going to be with you through Aquarius, which is your sector of everyday thoughts and communication, through to 2043 and 44. So it's an exciting window of opportunity. Pluto in Aquarius works much better for you than Pluto in Capricorn, because Aquarius and Sagittarius energy is sextile, but also you share a love of freedom. Also, you can both be very progressive signs, so you're much more instinctively aligned. Fire and air work well together. The air oxygenates your inner flame, so you can find yourself, despite Mercury's retrograde at the end of this month, really rediscovering your joie de vivre. Now this may mean that you're going to reposition yourself in terms of your work, your overall life structure, even finances in some kind of big way, but it's a big way that's really going to feel right. I feel it's been calling out to you for some time, but a big shift and realignment can really work for you as this month draws to a close. It's been a pleasure being with you, Sagittarius. Have a great November, and please do check out your year 2025 deep dive video forecast by seeing the link beneath this video. Welcome Capricorn to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the ascendant, sun or the moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 Zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart right at the start of the month, which holds some very important pointers, not least the position of the luminaries. As you go into this new month, the moon is applying to the sun. So we have a new moon in your 11th house. Now the sign of Scorpio can be intense, but it's also to do with transformations. The 11th house can be about your future direction, but it also can be about your network, your friendships, your highest hopes, and it can also be to do with strokes of fortune. So that new moon sets the scene right at the start of the month. But ironically, the two rulers of the sign of Scorpio, Mars, traditional, Pluto, modern, are in a tense opposition. Now, Pluto is going to be leaving your sign on the 19th for the last time in our lifetimes. So that's something to really look forward to. But that opposition to Mars is in your sector of relating. Pluto in your sign is very much about you as the individual. So it seems to be that with them feeding into the narrative of that new moon, it is going to be in some ways about feeling that you're heard, but particularly around your relationships, for you to plan that future that the new moon gives you the chance to work with. But the key is, Capricorn, is that your ruler Saturn is applying to Venus, the planet of relating, but that's in a hidden part of your chart, suggesting when it's joined by Mercury on the 2nd, that you could have some work to do in terms of deciding and deciphering who's really good for you, because conversations can see some revelations, particularly in week 2 when Mercury squares up with Saturn. Now on the 3rd of the month we have the exact opposition between Mars and Pluto. Essentially, when these two go face to face, we're talking about willpower. If that power is used wisely, it can be for the good. But sometimes what we can get with that particular opposition is Mars, which is rather tender and defensive in Cancer, can see us or see you feeling quite vulnerable potentially around a certain relationship, or on the other side of the celestial coin, perhaps feeling a bit irritable and a bit moody. And with Pluto there, the chances are you're going to want to assert what you want from the situation with a little more vigour. Now your ruler Saturn is squaring up with Venus at the start of this month, suggesting that some hidden problems in any kind of relationship could be teased into the open. But in actual fact, right at the start of the month, Mercury, Mars and Neptune are in a grand water trine. Now Mercury, like the new moon, is in the sign of Scorpio, but it's in an intense opposition with Uranus at the start of this month. Is there going to be a new player that seizes your attention? It's possible, but even if you are drawn towards them, as Mercury makes that transition into Sagittarius on the 2nd, you may want to keep it close to your chest as the month begins. So that's the scene as we sweep into this new month. You're being asked to think about your future, your connections, potentially a relationship, and there could be some information that's going to come into the open. Now on the 4th, Mars makes the move from Cancer, where it's been since the 6th of September, into the sign of Leo, which for you is house 8. If there is someone who's really catching your imagination in a more intimate way, that can hot things up, particularly through to the 6th of December when Mars goes into its retrograde. But on the 7th, Mercury goes into its pre-retrograde shadow. And to be honest, right through to the 3rd of January next year, it's possible that something you need to work through of a particularly sensitive nature may seem to bog you down a little bit. You could feel more vulnerable about communications in general. The great news, however, is that on the 11th, Venus glides into your sign and escapes a square with Neptune that may have created even more disorientation. If you do need to make a key decision, perhaps to break free from a tie that isn't working, I feel Venus arriving in your sign is urging you to seize your power. But if you're thinking more about Venus's more decorative qualities, it's a great chance to think about giving yourself some kind of makeover. But the 15th sees your ruler go direct. For the last 5 months, it may have seemed that certain communications or relationships, potentially with a neighbour, potentially with a sibling, have just seemed that much more heavier going. You may have had a disinclination to connect with other people because of Saturn's retrograde. But also on the 15th, there is a full moon. A full moon in the most charismatic part of your chart, the 5th house, but it's very close to Uranus. And in the week following, the 3rd week of this month, the Sun and Uranus are in an opposition. And if you're not feeling it when it comes to that future, well, in terms of one particular involvement, whether it is a friendship, a group of people, or a more intimate relationship, or just in terms of your long-term life plan, you may be tempted to change things up. Now that may be counterintuitive to someone like you who likes to have a certain amount of stability and continuity. But Uranus has been pushing you since March 2019 to be more experimental. So you have a chance to do something more dramatic on the back of that particular full moon. But the 19th sees Pluto leave your sign. It just depends on your personal experience what since 2008 has represented for you. For some people it may have seemed old activities or old friendships, even an old job, an old way of being has gone and has been completely reborn, and that rebirth may have been very positive for you. Then again, for other people, Pluto going backwards and forwards across the sun, your ascendant, or other personal planets such as Mercury, which can often be very close to the sun, may have not always been easy. What Pluto encourages us to do is transform. So its arrival for the long term in your second solar house is asking you to think about your values, your self-worth, but critically also money. The second house can also be about things like food. So a good time to perhaps change your diet or get more invested in making stuff from scratch. But the 21st sees the sun join up with Mercury in the sign of Sagittarius, which for you is your 12th house. And that sun position does link to Pluto. It's possible that you're being asked at this juncture in the month to quarry out value from your inner resources. See parts of your psychology, your resilience, for example, your determination, the way you can keep grinding away when life is quite hard. Or there could be old talents and skills that you can repurpose in a fresh way that gives you some kind of financial upturn or just makes you feel better about you. But with Mercury going retrograde on the 26th through to the middle of December, there may be, unfortunately, some cross wires. We all know that Mercury can cause mischief, but in the 12th house, what it can do also is activate our imagination, but also our psychological imagination. So it's possible that a fearfulness can be aroused, and you may find yourself wanting to stay a little bit more detached from other people as this month draws to a close. With Mars also in the deep 8th house, if there has been a relationship issue that you're unsure about, and with that electric separating energy of the sun opposing Uranus, maybe things have changed suddenly, and now you're dealing with the fallout. But that fallout can be a very valuable time for you if you embrace the opportunity. And that's the whole issue, really, to be honest, with the transitions of Pluto and also Mars this month for you. They're moving the dial more towards your values, but also how you marshal your resources. And that may also be another area that requires some very deep thinking. But once the sun returns to your sign in a month's time, and we have the winter solstice, that will be your point of rebirth. And not just for the following 4 weeks, but for the following 13 weeks, right round to the spring equinox. So just go with the energy, go with the flow. There are some important things to deal with this month, but if you have been sticking with a situation just because that tends to be your instinct, you are being pushed in some ways to be more provocative this month. To check out your year 2025 deep dive video, please see the link beneath this video. But have a great month, take care, and goodbye. Welcome Aquarius to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 Zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm sharing your event chart right at the start of the month. As ever, with any event chart, we need to look at the planets which are closest to the angles. So in your case, it is Mars and Pluto, but also the position of the moon. Let's look at the moon first of all. It's moving towards the sun, and on the first day applies to the sun in a new moon. A new moon in the 10th house, the most visible part of your chart, is where you're going to connect to the wider world. The suggestion is that your emotions concerning work, your public standing, how people view you, your relationship with people who are in positions of authority, or even your parents, could be a big part of this month's story. But if we look at those angles with Pluto and Mars in an opposition, which reaches a peak on the 3rd, that's quite complex, because Mars is in the part of your scope to do with the details, to do with the structure, to do with where we put in the neat raw energy, the 6th house. So as much as those players, along with the Sun and the Moon, Mercury in your 10th house, which are pushing you to raise your profile this month, how you go about delivering is the key with Mars. But unfortunately, Pluto could push something into the open that could be a little bit challenging, and that may become more obvious once Venus moves into Capricorn on the 11th. And it may be that someone is not quite as aligned to what you want to do as you would like. There could be a clash of values. Often with Aquarius people, it is important to be pragmatic. You understand that better than the archetype of your sign because of your co-ruler Saturn. Your other ruler Uranus is much more progressive, but right at the start of this month, that's in an electric opposition with Mercury. If you aren't feeling very happy in a job, therefore, the fact that Pluto can tease into the open some simmering resentments and Uranus can make you very restless, does suggest that just pitching for some kind of golden prize, which the new moon suggests you could do, may not be quite as straightforward as you would like. Further evidence of that is that Venus is in your sector of higher values and friendship, but clashes with Saturn right at the start of the month. Then Venus is joined by Mercury on the 2nd, which in week 2 then also clashes with Saturn. Then, just before the 11th, Venus clashes with Neptune. So if you are trying to work with people who come from a very different place to you, have different approaches, you may find it quite tricky to tie down something that really works for you in exactly the way you want, but not impossible. Because although we have a collision between Mars and Pluto on the 3rd, which becomes exact, and they're broadly in touch with one another within 3 degrees through to the 13th, which can create a lot of turbulence for us all collectively. I feel that once Mars moves into your 7th house on the 4th, that's going to embolden you. It's going to help you to put down some very solid markers in terms of your boundaries. And if there is a job that you want to go for and you need to do a presentation or an application, or you need to do a pitch if you have your own business or you're selling into a company or a corporation, Mars will give you more strength and more self-confidence. But on the 7th, Mercury, freshly in the sign of Sagittarius, goes into its pre-retrograde shadow. Now, Mercury has been occupying Sagittarius a lot over the last couple of years, and it has been going through retrogrades. So for you, it's impacting on your sector of friendship and your network. The retrograde proper begins on the 26th, but through to the 3rd of January next year, there could be some fluidity about some of the people that you link to, but also your long-term plan could be quite fluid too. However, back to the 11th. So Venus joins with Pluto in Capricorn for 1 week in terms of Pluto being there as well. What does this mean? If there is a relationship which needs to be recognized as not being as good as it could be, it may be a romantic one, but it's much more likely, I feel, to be a professional one where someone hasn't got your back as much as they could. It's going to be revealed through that week. On the 15th, however, Saturn, your traditional ruler, goes direct. If for the last 5 months you've had to work very tenaciously in terms of managing your resources and everyday money, or even propping up your sense of self-worth, it wouldn't be a surprise. That pressure can ease. But on the same day, we do have a very dramatic full moon in your 4th house of home, family, emotion, but it's alongside Uranus. This is a story that's been running for you in particular for 5 months since May 2018, and then again for us all from March 2019. So the demands of the sun and that initial new moon of this month, which are urging you to demonstrate how talented you are and to gain greater recognition, needs to be tempered against that part of you that does need to be a free spirit. So if you are a natural bohemian, the week following that full moon could see you decide to step away from something that just isn't working for you. If you're someone who is more applied to a particular goal or ambition, you may be able to feed off any frustration quietly and discreetly. And certainly Pluto joining you on the 19th is a seminal moment, undoubtedly, because it's the 3rd visit. The first was from the end of March for 11 weeks in 23. The second from the 21st of January, Pluto's birthday, this year through to 2nd September. Now we get event 3. So we've had a lot more practice at dealing with Pluto in Aquarius. Now, if you've got the sun or the ascendant, the moon or other personal planets right at the start of Aquarius, you're going to feel this very keenly. Because Pluto is about transformation, and of course it depends what house in your natal chart those players might be located. So if they're in the 3rd house, it's going to be a time of very deep change around your thoughts, your belief system, your communicational style. If it's in the 9th house, you may want to learn some new skills. Higher education or travel could call out to you, but some kind of transformation is possible. But do remember that Pluto can be about rebirth, but sometimes before the rebirth can occur, we have to jettison the parts of our lives which aren't working very well. However, the 21st of this month sees the sun join the sign of Sagittarius, which has a commonality with Aquarius. It's a freedom lover, like space, can be very independent, can be outspoken, but it links back in a sextile, which is very constructive, to the position of Pluto. So if you are early in Aquarius, you can really get some uplift from that joint event. But the 26th does see Mercury, as I mentioned before, go fully into retrograde through to the middle of December. And in the 11th house, that can be about luck, can be about our social interactions, where we mix and mingle, our network, the people that we connect to in a group, our societies, our higher interests, our higher purpose. And there may be some rethinking. You may see it as being about Pluto, but remember, on the 4th of this month, Mars moves into your sector of relating, and I feel that's going to empower you to really put a mark down about what you will or will not accept. So if you've been in a tricky relationship, you may be quite invested, you may really love the other person, you may be in a friendship group where it's not always been straightforward, but there's a lot of long-standing loyalty and history. But Mars is going to make you fiercer, particularly as it faces up to Pluto. It's a bit broader towards the end of this month, about 4 or 5 degrees, but it is going to make you much more willful about taking a firmer grip on your life direction. So Pluto moving through the 12th house since 2008 has probably been incredibly painful at times. There may have been some very profound betrayals. You may have really had to let go of certain people and players who no longer were really attuned to who you were at a deeper level. But see this as a fresh beginning. So if you do find yourself making some modifications to your plan, perhaps altering some of your connections to certain people and situations, Just try to evolve with it, because that's the best way to work with Pluto. Don't fight it. Change is almost inevitable, I'm afraid. And because the Sun does forge an electric opposition with Uranus in week 3 of this month, if there is a job or professional situation which does mean that you need to be more flexible about your home life, try to flow with that too. If you've yet to watch your year 2025 deep dive Aquarius Zodiac forecast, please see the link beneath this video. But have a great November. Take care and goodbye. Welcome Pisces to your in-depth monthly forecast for November 2024 for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. Please see beneath this video to view your year 2025 Zodiac forecast. You can also order your personal forecast for next year now, get the rest of this year free, and also your life roadmap report and 30% off. Please see below for that too. On the screen now, I'm sharing your event chart right at the start of the month. Now the big takeout is the new moon on the first day, it would seem, but we do need to be mindful of the two players in your sign, Saturn and Neptune. They're both hugely influential this month, not least Neptune, because it starts this month in a glorious alliance with Mars, but also with Mercury. So we have a water grand trine. Neptune in your sign has encouraged you since 2012 to invest in your creativity and individuality. With the position of Mercury in your 9th house, this connection between them inspire you around travel. Mercury is also in an electric opposition with Uranus, which can make you a little bit restless. But the link back to Mars is in your 5th house. That's very much about passion, joy, fun. So if you're wanting to do something at the start of this month, which in some ways is different and more spontaneous, the new moon and that grand water trine certainly give you a lot of encouragement. But what about Saturn? Saturn starts this month in a difficult angle with Venus. Venus is up top in your chart, encouraging you to use your people skills and charm to make progress professionally. But because of the restless energies in Scorpio, a 9th house new moon is really pushing us in some way to be much more spontaneous, to break out, to be more free-spirited, perhaps more experimental. If you are someone who wants to learn something, the next month can be pivotal for finding and signing up for a key course. If you want to travel somewhere, that also can be something that inspires you. But the 9th house can also be about freedom, personal independence. Are you pinned into a situation, professionally, work-wise, or in a relationship which is not working so well for you? So that square with Saturn and Venus really asks you to be mindful of that. Now Mercury is going to move across your 10th house cusp on the 2nd, pushing you to seize the moment if it does come to learning new skills around your work. So if it's your work that's become rather dull and repetitive, Mercury moving across that point is a great time to reskill, go on some kind of course. However, as Mercury moves, so it does move away from the opposition to Uranus. But one opposition none of us can escape this month is the mighty clash between Mars and Pluto. That becomes exact on the 3rd. For you, Pluto, from the 2nd of September through till now, and from the 1st of January through to the 21st, was emphasising the part of your situation to do with your long-term plan. But it's about to move this month on the 19th into your 12th house. That's going to bring a lot of very deep transformations into your life through to 2043-44. However, at the start of this month, its opposition to Mars could see you having to make a key decision about your long-term future. And that new moon in your 9th house, along with the initial location of Mercury opposite Uranus, gives you an idea that there's going to be restless energies threaded through the whole of this month. So if you do feel penned in a situation, or you can't freely express yourself, then by the full moon on the 15th of this month, and when Saturn in your sign goes direct, that's going to provide week 3 a window of opportunity to do something that really breaks out. Maybe is all on daring, particularly if you're someone who does tend to gain a lot from helping and assisting others. Because perhaps what Saturn's been saying to you since March 2023, when he arrived in your sign for the first time in around about 28.5 years, what he was essentially saying to you is, have you been too devotional since Neptune's been in your sign? Is there a time for you to be a bit cooler, a bit more protected about your personal energy and where you invest it? So I feel that particularly once Mars moves into Leo on the 4th, that's asking you to think more about where you can use your creativity in a practical way that gives you some kind of tangible outcome. And Mars there can also give you encouragement to get fitter. You're going to have more stamina, particularly through to the 6th of December, which will be welcome. Then Mars does retrograde. But on the 7th, Mercury, which moves across that 10th house cusp on the 2nd, does go into its pre-retrograde shadow, so it's slowing down, but it also squares up in week 2 with Saturn. So if there are questions about your career, and you have to deal with a line manager, for example, or an organization which has very stringent parameters which make it difficult to breathe and flex as a mutable sign needs to do, all of that can really get you thinking. And that takes us to Venus. Venus arrives to join with Pluto in your sector of friendship and sociability on the 11th. And maybe if you see a long-term plan or working with people who are a bit freer spirited, there's a chance to go for it, particularly as Saturn goes direct on the 15th. But it requires you to have the confidence to break out of something that may have had a certain degree of a pattern to it, which may have given you a structure in your life. So the full moon of the 15th and its electric connection to Uranus is going to see you feel a little on edge. But also it can see some very intense discussions in week 3. Someone could be very provocative, perhaps tell you right out straight what they feel you need to hear. But you know, that person might actually be a very positive player for you, because as much as you may find it a bit intrusive, a bit annoying, perhaps even downright rude, they may well have a point. And if it's someone who is a friend, who really does care about you, do be open to what they have to say. The 19th sees Pluto go deep in 12. The 21st, the Sun joins with Mercury in 10. If you do need to make that transition professionally, some opportunities can come up. Don't rush them. Mercury goes fully retrograde on the 26th and does stay in retrograde through to the middle of December, and it doesn't emerge from the post-retrograde shadow until early January next year. So there may be a period where you do need to soul search about what you really want. But certainly you could hear from someone from your past. Mercury retrogrades are not all bad. There is a popular archetype that Mercury retrogrades only cause tangles, frustrations and delays, all of which can happen, but they also give us an opportunity to rethink. So Mercury retrograde in the 10th house means that you could decide to follow a particular pathway, but then for whatever reason there are roadblocks. But those roadblocks are for a reason. So by the time you get to early January, you will be clearer on what you need to do with that career opportunity. But it is going to give you a lot of food for thought in this month, particularly once Mars moves into house 6. And Pluto is going to provoke you in a way which may surprise you by bringing up issues from the past that you thought maybe that you had dealt with. Some of these could be very tender and painful ones. The more you can release, but also release any fears and inhibitions which are holding you back from seizing the golden prize which is within your grasp. So this month, essentially, Pisces, is a month which urges you to be experimental, to break free of restrictive patterns, whether it's around your social situation, your personal daily routines, the choice of TV programs or films, what you read. Try to bring a real spirit of openness. There's going to be a lot of conversation. There could be a very highly charged discussion on the 3rd with Mars and Pluto opposite, particularly if you're not feeling it in a romantic situation and you sense that you do need to break free. But with Venus moving into Capricorn on the 11th, that's asking you to think about your long-term future. And that essentially is what the change is about. It's reaching towards a new outlet for you, a new purpose that has a greater meaning beyond just the tangible rewards that we're often motivated by, which of course is success, goals, status, greater earnings. Those things are all very important, but I feel that Venus in that last week, when it's with Pluto, is really asking you to make sense of what Pluto's meant for you since 2008. It's been a pleasure being with you. Please check out your year 2025 deep dive video by clicking on the link beneath this video. But for now, take care and have a great November.